You have to want it more than anything. Your desire, that's the key. You have to want this, I shouldn't even say more than anything. It would be more true to say the only thing. People say sometimes, how can I desire something I already am? But the truth is, you don't believe that. You don't believe you are that, because if you did believe it, you would be just in this blissful experience all the time. But you have to want this. And the good thing is, like Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and everything else comes to you. You're not going to lack anything. Everything you ever need will be given to you, but it has to begin with your desire. You have to want one thing, and then everything else comes to you. People come up to me all the time and ask, well, what's the quickest and simplest thing I can do to begin to wake up? And the answer is to spend time every day walking around wherever you live, wherever you work, and looking at everyone who passes, either walking or in a car, and seeing them as love. Within 5 minutes, I promise, you're going to feel your heart and your whole soul begin to expand. And the reason that happens is because what you're seeing, what you're choosing, is true. Everyone that you do meet is that, no matter how they act. Each one of them, has a part to play in this awakening. And if I'm willing to look through, okay, I'll just say the word, Donald Trump. If I'm willing to look through the appearance and see only the divine in him, who's set free by that? Me. I'm set free by that. If I can make a habit of doing that with everyone that I meet, I'm going to find myself just instantly lifted into that experience because it's true. And when you practice or even pretend what is true, the truth of that experience is automatic.
So I'm going to pull out some key lines from the book. Love is the key to remembering who you are.
Mm-hmm. Because love is who you are. It's that simple. In fact, just this morning here in our community, I did the whole lesson on that one line from A Course in Miracles, which is teach only love, for that is what you are. And when you teach what you are, even if you've forgotten who or what you are, because it is who you are, the experience of that truth becomes automatic and available. And so that's what he meant when he says that in Giovanni, is that all you need to do is to teach the truth that's already within you, and then that truth lights through your whole life.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. And that gets to whether you're spiritual, whether you're this religion, whether you're that religion, whatever you define yourself in, believing in a God versus only God.
I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I say all the time now. In fact, I just said this yesterday, that I stopped believing in God a long time ago, or at least a God out there somewhere. I don't believe in a God, but what I believe in is only God. That's all there is. And when you see that, instead of like an old white man up in heaven dressed like Santa Claus,
right?
I mean, come on, seriously? How did any of us ever buy into such a ridiculous idea? And not only that, but a God that's watching everything that you do.
Judging you, waiting
for you to mess up. Okay, good, there you go. Eternal fire, eternal damnation. How could anyone in their right mind think that that's love or call God loving? It's like a story that I'll tell. I'm telling you all sorts of things that I never say in interviews, but here's a story. When my daughter was about 4, I think, which is the same age as my granddaughter now, it was Christmas time, and she had been making her list of everything she's going to ask Santa for. And one day I was asked by a friend who ran this department store. The guy who played Santa was sick and asked me if I would come in and dress up as Santa Claus and be Santa for the day. I said, yes, of course. And I said, let's bring Angela in to Daddy Santa, and she won't know it's me, and we can have pictures taken, and we'll always remember. So that's what the plan was. And I'm sitting there in my big Santa Claus chair, and I can see Linda and Angela walk in through the door. And I stand up in my biggest Santa Claus voice and said, ho, 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 hello, Angela.
She had you dialed, didn't she?
She freaked out. She started screaming at the top of her lungs. Everyone in the store is looking to see what's happening to this poor kid. And she had her head buried in her mom's stomach, because in that moment, this possible fantasy that she just played with in her mind suddenly became real. He really was watching her. He really was making a list and checking it twice, all of that. And in that moment, the reality of, oh my goodness, came crashing in, and she wasn't going to come a step closer. But what I did, which may not have been psychologically sound, but what I did, she couldn't see me, so I walked over there, and I got down on my knees, and when she saw Santa Claus like right in front of her face, she almost died. But I knew if I could just get her to look into my eyes for a moment, I knew what I would do. So she looked at me just out of the corner of her eye. I pulled the beard down and said, "Angela, it's just Daddy." It was like her brain went but then she relaxed and she realized there's nothing for me to be afraid of. It's just Daddy. And it was gone. And it's the same thing with us, with God. We always say we want to experience this. We want, whatever we call God, however we define that, that's what we want. And the truth is, it's the last thing you want. When you say that's the only thing I want, go a little deeper, and what you're going to find is that's the thing you're most afraid of. Because there's still that seed of guilt called identity that's still present in each and every single one of us. And it's only when we have that face-to-face, like Angela had with Santa Claus, that ancient fear surfaces. But that ancient fear has to surface in order for us to look and then have the beard come down and realize it's just Daddy. And I don't have to be afraid of Daddy.
So let's back up in time. How old were you, and why did you first become interested in St. Francis?
I think I started to really fall in love with him when I was, probably 13. In fact, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story that relates to this tour that I'm doing. My family moved to Central Illinois. We moved around a lot, but we spent 3 years in Central Illinois. And I went to a Catholic grade school, and I was an altar boy. And one day while I was serving Mass as an altar boy, there was a statue of St. Francis there. And I had a deep mystical experience as I just sat there looking at that statue. And it overwhelmed me. And it made me want to leave home right after high school to become a Franciscan. I was there for about 2 years. And even though I left the order at that time, it stays with you. I mean, Francis, once he gets his hooks into you, he never really lets go. And so now, many years later, I wrote the book Giovanni and the Camino of St. Francis. But when I was getting ready to do the tour, I didn't know how to talk about a fiction book. And so I was actually watching a musical with Bruce Springsteen, of all people.
Very cool.
Yeah, Bruce did a Broadway show called Springsteen on Broadway, and he was just telling stories from his life, and he'd pick up his guitar and play along. And as I was watching it, I thought, it'd be amazing if St. Francis could come back 800 years and tell the story of his life and sing songs about his town, his time. And so I wrote the musical, which I'm traveling across the country here shortly to do and to perform on Broadway, as Bruce did.
Awesome.
But in planning this tour, one morning I got a message from the pastor of a church in Peoria, Illinois, called Holy Family. And he apparently had read Giovanni, and he heard about the tour, and he called me and said, "I saw you're going to be in St. Louis and Chicago. We're right in the middle. Can you stop in Peoria and do your musical here at our church?" It was the same church that I grew up in, where I had that experience with St. Francis, where I was an altar boy, had my first confirmation, everything. So it's amazing to see how everything is coming full circle. So to answer your question, I've always loved St. Francis, but that was probably the moment where it really congealed.
And that's a big picture. Thank you for sharing. That's a big picture theme of what we're talking about, is when you put yourself out there on the road of life and have faith. And we'll talk what that means and whether faith is weak or strong, but what it means to put yourself out there in that state of grace, in that state of love, that kind of all tumblers fall into place and you magically find yourself, not that you could ever really be off path, but you magically find yourself exactly where you're supposed to be. So I'll ask a question now that I need to have you back and ask later on, which is the one single most important lesson you've learned from St. Francis, because once you are fully inhabiting his beingness, this is going to go to a whole new level.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's an easy answer. Give everything. Francis was someone 800 years ago who gave everything. If you don't know much about his story, he was born a rich kid in Assisi, the son of the richest cloth merchant in town. So he had everything that you were supposed to have to make happy, but he wasn't. He was a soldier. He was captured in the war with neighboring Perugia and lay in a prison cell for a year. And that's when his heart broke open. And he realized that to give everything of true value, he had to let go of everything that had no value. And that's when he literally stripped naked in front of the whole town and walked out of Assisi and began his new life.
If we all listen to what we're going to be talking about today, maybe we can all shift a little bit in that direction and a little bit more, create some critical mass. But how are you cracked open?
Oh, I'm continually getting cracked open. And often it's through trauma. Often it's through difficulty. We don't tend to get cracked when everything is going our way. We tend to crack open when things aren't going our way. And I've heard it said many times that God can only enter in through a broken heart. And I believe it's true, because basically we have to realize and come into the experience that this world that we've created through the split mind in separation is not anything. It's not the real world. And beyond this world, there is another world of oneness. And we can come into that experience right now. But in order to do that, we have to first be stripped. Francis was stripped of everything. And that's when his journey really started. We've all probably had some experiences where we've been stripped. Yeah. Things have happened to us, terrible. For me, probably the most profound was 14 years ago, just a couple of days ago was the anniversary on Thanksgiving. My former wife, Linda, was murdered in Chicago. And it was at a time when we were possibly getting back together, and it was a great trauma for our daughter and I, and for everyone who loved her. And my goodness, to go through something like that, not something I hope upon anyone, but it brought me down to the bottom level, and it took me up to the highest level. And that's what can happen if we surrender to it, if we give everything to those situations. So, yeah, the world's being cracked open right now, and it's a very good thing if you look at it in the right way.
Thank you. That's such a profound experience. It's such an important, forgive me, I don't know any other way to put it, such an important experience. For everybody listening who we're going through our own no mud, no lotus life right now, what does it mean, and how did you fully surrender to that experience?
Well, the first thing I did was give myself fully to it.
What does that mean?
It means the only way out is in. You can't spiritual your way around things like that. I remember when Linda was killed, people would come up to me and say the silliest things, very spiritual things. Things like, well, she chose her own path, and this was part of her soul's journey. And I wanted to strangle people when they said that. Because okay, yeah, I know that, but that's not what I need to hear right now. Right. The only thing you can say to someone in that situation is, I'm with you. I love you. And give me the freedom to feel it as deeply as possible. So even though I know intellectually all the things we're supposed to know spiritually, you can't spiritual your way through it. That's a disaster waiting to happen. You have to go, you have to cry, you have to feel, you need to go into it as deep as you can. In fact, I remember a very dear friend of mine is Neil Donald Walsh. And when Linda was killed, he came to Chicago, he stood at my side the whole time. And at one point, someone said something to me, like, when you get over this, and I said, this is not the kind of thing you get over. And Neil turned to me and said, that's right, you'll never get over this. However, there will come a day where it's no longer over you. And that has stayed with me my whole life, and it's so true. Anyone who's been through a trauma like that knows you never get over it. You never stop missing that person. But there comes a moment when you have gone deep enough and you felt it deep enough that it's like a cloud that suddenly is no longer over the top of you. But the only way through it is into it, and that's what I had to do with Linda. Back to St. Francis, that's what Francis had to do as well. I think that's what every great mystic has had to do. They have to go into the shadow. They have to go into the darkness. And the only way through that is not to try and go around it, but right directly through it.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're talking about loosely about a pilgrimage, about a walking, about a journey, a camino across part of Italy to Assisi. And when you say you've got to go through it, you've got to go into it, the concept of walking really strongly comes to mind. In fact, there's a line from a character. We won't give away who he may really be in the book.
Right.
But he says, walking will bring you back to your essence. What does that mean?
Oh gosh, it's true. I've walked some of the Camino de Santiago in Spain, and I've walked the Camino in Italy, I think 4 or 5 times now. I love bringing groups because it really does. They have that same experience where it just opens them up. If a Camino is easy, it's not worth it. No Camino is supposed to be easy. It's challenging. The Camino of our lives, they're challenging. But it's by walking that challenge and being true to it with an open heart that we receive those benefits. And, the Camino of St. Francis, it goes from a place called La Verna in the Tuscan mountains, which was it is now a monastery, but back then it was where Francis would go to retreat. It's where he received the stigmata, or the wounds of Christ. It's a very sacred place, and it's about a 110-mile walk to Assisi. And every time I've walked it, it's hard. It's quite a journey because it's like this the whole time. But boy, when you crest that hill at the end and you see Assisi for the first time, there's nothing like it. And I think that speaks to our spiritual journey as well. When we go through all the challenges that we go through, we let go of all the things we need to let go of. But there comes a moment where we come to the crest of that final hill, and there it is, and our heart opens, and we realize that in reality, we never really left. We never left our home. It was all just this crazy dream that made us believe something that was never true.
The scenery may change, but the journey is always the same.
Yeah. I've been a student of A Course in Miracles for over 25 years. And there's a statement that we use often there, which is journey without distance. It's a journey, absolutely, but you're not really going anywhere because the truth is you never left, except you're in your imagination. We're still in heaven, cheering each other on, looking back and remembering this moment where we seemed to be separate, where we seemed to be isolated and not at home, when all the while we were sitting right there safe and whole and complete. It's a universal experience. It's not a Christian experience or a Buddhist experience. It's a universal experience, but it comes from being stripped of everything that the world tells us we need and being filled with everything that we are already.
So it was 2004. I had a dream. I sold all my racing gear. I was a professional cyclist. I was training. I was one of the top masters, 30 plus sprinters in the country, top 10, and sold all my track gear and went to Portland, Oregon.
Good.
Started my bike ride, 40-day, 5,000 miles solo unsupported across the country.
40 days?
40 days, 125 miles a day. I call it road magic. And I went with no money, with no resources. It all came to me. It was so much magic and so much freaking difficulty. I will not kid you. For the first 10 days, there was a calamity or what appeared to be a tragedy each and every day until I learned, they didn't stop, that those were actually the gifts. First day, 5 blowouts, record rainfall in Portland, riding through half a foot of water, standing water in the roads, freezing. I get to Reno, and there's a guy, a sports writer, who writes an article talking about this guy Sandler will never make it across the country. I said, if I have to, If my legs give out, I will grab the pedals with my teeth, and I will use my neck to pedal it around. Road magic is divine providence. It is trusting. It is putting yourself out there as best as you can, putting yourself in a place of love, and things appear before you.
Let's talk a little bit about Anna in the story. We haven't really talked about the book, but the book is about a woman in Portland and named Anna. By the way, I'll begin by saying I started thinking about this story a number of years ago when I was walking the Camino in Italy, and sometimes I just start playing with story ideas, and yet I had decided that I wasn't going to write another book. I'd written, I think, 15 at that time, because when you have some success, your publisher just wants you to keep pumping them out. And I didn't really feel like I had anything to say, so I said, I'm not going to write another book until I have something that I really want to say. But I played with this story, and it haunted me. It wouldn't go away. And so for 7 years I waited, but then finally I sat down and began writing.
You talk about in the beginning that this book, like a 9-month pregnancy, 9 months plus, had to be birthed.
Yeah, it had to. Yeah, I had to tell this story. And I'm so glad I did. It was so fun because I knew how it began and I knew how it ended, but I didn't know much about what was going to go on in the middle. So I had to go on this journey with this woman, Anna, who has been, had a difficult life, and she's pretty bitter about it. And she was originally from Italy, and she decides for the first time in 45 years to go back, but not in just some ordinary way. She decides, even though she doesn't believe in God or St. Francis, she's going to walk this Camino. And she meets this young guy, a young Italian named Giovanni, who all he can talk about is St. Francis and God. And she says, listen, if we're going to be walking together, I don't want to hear that. And he says, okay, then we'll speak only of love, because it's the same thing. And this book is just their story. And as Giovanni slowly melts her heart with the stories about St. Francis and other things, and Anna finally realizes that you're never too old to heal your life. And as I said, I played with this story for a long time and finally sat down, a year or so ago, and just began writing. And it is so fun when you're having as much of a discovery as the reader is. And when I show up in a chapter and I'm like, well, what's going to happen? I know that Giovanni is in a hurry to get into this town called Citerna. Something's going to happen, but I don't know. Oh, there's going to be a woman that they meet. Why? And then piece after piece, it comes. I remember that particular story when I got to the point where I realized what it was. It was like, oh yeah. That's why.
That's a holy crap moment.
Yeah, holy mackerel. That was, and so the whole book was like that. And then, of course, going out and sharing the story in the book during the book tour earlier this year. And now, of course, the musical. And I probably should mention that if people want to see the first 20 minutes of the musical, they can do so by just going to jamesftwyman.com. F as in Francis. Yep. jamesftwyman.com. And then there's another link that takes you to the site for the musical, and I just performed it 3 times in Assisi. Yep. And it was shot there, and you can go watch it. You can also see the schedule to see if I'm coming anywhere near where you live, or join us in New York. Let me say something about New York as well, because we're doing something that's never been done on Broadway. The show is, sure, people are going to be buying tickets, but the show is really not for them. The show is for people who we're going to be inviting every day who are homeless. We're going to be on the street every day, passing out free tickets to the homeless, to the people on the street. We're going to have a meal together. And the people who buy the tickets are the ones serving the meals, cooking the meals, because this is what Francis would have done. So I'm thinking that half the audience is going to be filled with people who would never, even if they had money, be allowed into a Broadway musical. And that's who we're performing this with.
How do you start your day, James?
I have a new thing I'm working on. Years ago, Wayne Dyer and I put out a meditation CD. It was originally called the Moses Code Frequency. When Wayne and I did it, it was called the I Am Wishes Fulfilled. And I took that. It basically is a meditation with this alchemical formula that brings into your experience the sound of the name of God. Okay? And I took that and I did a new mix of it with rhythms and beats. And something else that I've been working with lately are virtual reality glasses.
Very, very cool.
A program called the Levitation Meditation that integrates that frequency, this certain program that you're watching with the virtual reality glasses, and also deep breathing techniques. When you combine all of these together, it is the most transformative experience I've ever had. A lot of people today are talking about and doing many sorts of plant medicine shamanic journeys. This brings about a very, very similar experience, but without having to have any sort of intervention with a plant medicine. It takes you into the experience. So I start off my day every morning. It's a 33-minute process that I run through. And then I go downstairs where about 40 people are always down there waiting and share and just open. And that's how we start our day at Namaste Lake Chapala. We just open up and I can't even describe it. Especially when I do that in the morning, it lifts me so high. I'm so completely enveloped by the experience. All I can do is just shine that. So that's all we really do is shine together. But for me, it always begins with doing that meditation.
What would you tell people to help them shine if they're on their Camino, they're on their journey of life?
The problem is the ego wants so many things. Your soul only wants one thing. And the ego and the soul each have a mantra. The ego's mantra is I want. The soul's mantra is I am. And when you can focus everything into that one experience, that one statement, I am that, then you realize you've always been that, and everything else goes crashing away, and you find yourself in the heaven you never left except in your imagination.
I've got to ask, I said it was the last question, but again, I'm going to double back to people struggling who are listening today. How do you personally keep bringing it back?
I notice when I've strayed. I notice when the gravitational pull of the ego has pulled me back to earth, and then I choose again. Don't feel like you did something wrong. It's, someone asked me yesterday during the session, I don't know what he thought of me, but he said, do you still experience doubt, or do you still experience separating emotions? I'm like, yeah, all the time, but I choose again. Now I notice when I do, and I make a new choice, which is only love. And all we're asked to do is to become more and more consistent in that. We're not expected to get it perfect, just to be consistent, and then the Holy Spirit takes that last step for us. The spiritual journey is not one for lukewarm people or people who are just out for to go to church on Sunday. This takes work, and it's serious, but it's the most liberating thing you'll ever do.
I just had the most beautiful, heart-opening, heartwarming interview with James F. Twyman on Giovanni and the Camino of St. Francis. To check out more inspiring interviews, click here, subscribe below, and click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows. Love you guys.